In the world of risk aware consensual kink, there's one risk that many people don't realize that they're taking. Did you know that in most places in the world, BDSM is a crime? I bet you didn't know that. You didn't know that you could end up on an episode of Law and Order just for engaging in BDSM. And a lot of people will say, "Well, I got consent." But what they do not realize that uh, most places do not allow a person to consent to abuse. Let me frame this up for you. So this is why we insist that people do proper vetting, that they check out and make sure that people that they have as play partners or potential play partners, that they really understand and that they can trust those people. This is why having or engaging in BDSM with strangers can be much riskier than what you initially even planned or accounted for, because in a lot of places, BDSM is a crime. And if you were to engage in impact play, for instance, and left some marks, the person could go and a relative or uh, another partner see these marks, and the person could become embarrassed and could change their mind about the consensual act that they let you do, and could actually charge you after the fact with assault or battery. What could also happen is especially someone who is a mandatory reporter, could see marks on somebody's body and could report you as an abuser for leaving those marks, and you could be potentially be charged with assault or battery, assaulting somebody. You cannot in most places engage in BDSM activity and without accounting for the risk. You are taking a risk. Not all BDSM involves abuse or alleged abuse or torture, or leaving marks or striking, or not all of it is restraint. Some of it is mental, but in a lot of places you could still be charged with abuse because there's lots of different ways to abuse. So in today's episode, I'm Primal Piggy. This is BDSM United podcast. I want to just make you risk aware. I don't want to tell you not to. I don't want to give any special advice, tell you not to do BDSM or to do it. I'm not trying to give you any way to get around any laws. I'm not going to give you any legal advice. You definitely want to check with the place that you live or the place that you plan to play and see what is legal in your area. And it is up to you with all BDSM practices to be risk aware. Always get consent, even though consent is not necessarily people, even though people cannot necessarily consent to the act, you definitely want to at least have consent between you as partners, because you don't want to be raping anyone. Of course, that's not anything anyone wants to do. We always want to be nonviolent and consensual. And when I say nonviolent, it means that we we may hurt somebody, but we do not cause harm. Like, we don't cause lasting harm. We're not injuring somebody. We're just playing with someone. And so let's talk today a little about what the difference between abuse is and how BDSM is different than abuse. There are organizations, I will say this real fast, that there are organizations that are out there working on legislation. They have uh, they have had some legal teams accept that this is a possibility, that as long as your BDSM is involved in a consensual act between adults, that uh, that as long as it is consensual, that it should not be illegal, and they're working towards changing the legislation here in the United States, in the different states, to reflect this change of ideas in our culture, in the world culture, or in society as a whole. BDSM culture, we do not view BDSM as abuse. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Within our own BDSM culture, how do we differentiate between the things that we do and what is and is not abuse? And so the official distinctions between S&M and abuse were uh, carefully formulated by more than 20 organizations at the Second Leather Leadership Conference held in New York City in 1998. The conference concluded after creating a statement of principles and guidelines intended to help law enforcement and social service professionals understand the difference between abusive relationships and consensual sadomasochism. Here's some of the key findings. I'm not going to go through the whole document, but the original wording is so clear that we don't. I didn't want to really edit it very much, and so it says that S&M is a complex group of behaviors. This is sadomasochism between consenting adults involving the consensual exchange of power and the giving and receiving of intense erotic sensation or mental discipline. S&M includes intimate activities within the scope of informed consent that's freely given. Um, this is really good here. Abuse is physical, sexual, or emotional acts inflicted on a person without their informed and freely given consent. That's the biggest thing. Abuse is non-consensual. Within BDSM culture, we anything that is not consensual is abusive and therefore is automatically off limits in BDSM. It is an agreed upon rule that it is off limits. The S&M leather and fetish communities recognize the phrase safe, sane, and consensual as the best brief summary of principles guiding sadomasochism practices. Um, let's define those three. That is a common thing. We like to expand on safe, sane, and consensual by, in the opening, I mentioned risk aware consensual kink. It's called RACK, RACK, risk aware consensual kink. We like to add that risk aware part so that people, we believe that people that are playing together should know the risks and know the safety involved to mitigate most of those risks and to have the safest scenes possible. And so safe means knowing about the techniques and safety concerns involved in what you're doing and acting in accordance with that knowledge. That's what safe is, by the definition. Sane means knowing the difference between fantasy and reality and acting in accordance with that knowledge. Sane is knowing that what we're doing is a scene, and that and going into a scene where you may inflict hurt on somebody, usually pleasurable pain, but you're not trying to physically harm the person. You're not going in with the mindset that you're going to kill, maim, or do anything that is going to leave a lasting, intense. You're not going in with wax play with the intention of burning or causing third-degree burns on your partner. You're going in with the intention and the mindset that you're going to give pleasurable discomfort and pain with the dripping of the hot wax, and that you're going in with the mindset that your partner is going to be able to translate that pleasure and that pain into something sexual, erotic, or orgasmic, hopefully orgasmic. Consensual means respecting the limits imposed by each partner at all times. Consent is freely given. Consent can be revoked. Consent is specific to the acts involved. It's not blanket consent. Consent is something that we get or give every single time. Consent is that um, even within dynamics such as master slave, the person does always have the ability, it's extreme, but they have the ability to remove the collar and remove themselves from the relationship if they so choose. It is consensual slavery. And so, safe words. Safe words represent one of the recognized ways to maintain limits to ensure that each participant can end his or her participation with a word or gesture. Sorry. Um, Safe word isn't always just one word, and it's usually, uh, it's not like this magic bean. It's not this a safe word isn't a magic thing that stops a scene. A safe word is one way for someone to communicate, but there are other ways to communicate. There's tapping, there's making hand gestures, there are sometimes in bondage, and if somebody's gagged or something like that, they'll hold a ball in their hand, and if they drop the ball or they throw the bean bag or something like that, it signals to stop a scene or stop momentarily to check. um, it's not always stop and end everything, pack up and go home. Sometimes it's stop, let's see what's going on, let's reassess, let's see what I'm doing. Something's uncomfortable, something's pinching, something's cutting off circulation, we need to stop and see. And then there are these things called using your words, just using regular plain language, like ouch, that, oh my goodness, I need to use the bathroom. I need to pause. I think I may have diarrhea. There's I'm bleeding in a way that, I'm starting to get lightheaded. I'm feeling tingly on my fingers and toes. Different things like that. There are ways of using plain language. If you're in an MS and you're not permitted to speak, if you're if you do speak up, your master will generally know, or your mistress will generally know, that something is so intense that you needed to communicate, that you were willing to risk a punishment or a potential punishment to communicate. And they will oftentimes take that seriously, because in an MS, or, we generally see the slave partner as a piece of property, and we want to take really good care of our property because we've invested a lot in our relationship. We don't take it lightly, and we're not out there to try to cause harm to this partner that we developed and trained to be, our most treasured possession. And we did this huge investment. We're not out there trying to hurt them, in such a way to cause harm or destroy, or, do something to mess up the investment that we've made. And so a lot of times people say, oh, well, you don't have a safe word. So that sounds like a really big red flag. But they don't realize the intensity of the investment that goes into the relationship, and they don't realize that, someone, that the person's involved, the person who is giving the kink, the master or mistress, is not looking to cause bodily harm to their slave, because we treasure our slave. And this is in a master slave consensual, master slave authority exchange relationship, or a power exchange, a total power exchange relationship, as it's often called. And um, uh, so informed consent must be judged by balancing the following criteria for each encounter at the time the act occurs. Was informed consent expressly denied or withdrawn? Were there factors that negated the informed consent? Like, is somebody mentally incapacitated? Were they incapacitated or intoxicated? Were they in their right mind? Were they on some type of prescription software that inhibited their ability to give consent? Those kinds of things. What is the relationship of the participants? What was the nature of the activity? And what was the intent of the accused abuser? And so, oftentimes, like I said, you're going in with the intent to give pleasurable pain with wax play. You're not going in with the intent or the mindset to cause third-degree burns. And so, um, tests for abuse in a relationship. Now, these were really good. Whether an individual's SM role is top or bottom, abuse may exist if you answer no to any of the following questions. Are your needs and limits respected? Is your relationship built on honesty, trust, and respect? Are you able to express feelings of guilt or jealousy or unhappiness? Can you function in everyday life? Can you refuse to do illegal activities? Can you insist on safe sex practices? Can you choose to interact freely with others outside of your relationship? Oftentimes in porn that is created for entertainment purposes only, they will oftentimes toy with these ideas of consent. They'll sometimes portray like they're giving an accidental cream pie, or they're giving an intentional cream pie to somebody who is saying no. They're inseminating someone with fluids that in their pussy with the woman saying no. And a lot of times they're toying with these ideas of non-consent, but in practice, in reality, see, that's a fantasy. Porn is oftentimes a fantasy created for it's a fantasy created for entertainment purposes. But they are getting informed consent before they perform, because before the actors perform the scenes, and they're actors, they're not they're acting out this scene. And so oftentimes people will see these porn videos and see these people do these things and think that they can go and do those same things in real life, that they're somehow funny or they're exciting, or that it's going to turn out well for them. And what they're doing is they're abusing. They're not getting consent, and they're not realizing that the person actually got consent to do this, what appears to be non-consensual thing in this entertainment-only porn scene. And it can be dangerous because people will often copy what they see and not really think things through. In BDSM, in our culture, we always try to think things through. Sometimes we may overthink some things to a degree, but we always try to think things through. And could you answer no to these questions? Can you leave the situation without fearing that you will be harmed, or fearing the other participant or participants will harm themselves? Can you choose to exercise self-determination with money, employment, and life decisions? Do you feel free to discuss your practices and feelings with anyone you choose? Do you feel isolated, insulated, feel like it has to be a big secret? See, that could be you need to look at that and see if you're someone's secret. Maybe you're being manipulated, maybe you're being abused. Something for you to consider, um, and seek clarity on. Some of the concepts referred to in this statement are discussed in more detail in, like I said, in that, what was it called? In the principles and guidelines created by the Leather Leadership Conference in New York City in 1998. I think you can Google that and find uh, more about that. And so, let me be really clear that an abuser's victim may very well be their own partner who they believe that they love. However, the perpetrator and the victim may have very different beliefs or attitudes about a particular set of behaviors, or simply part of the submissive's training, or outright abuse. And so people may not always see eye to eye. That's why negotiations and contracts are a big part of BDSM culture. And negotiations are just discussions, and contracts are agreements. Really simple right there. And so that's that's the simple terminology of the more formal terminology. And so abusers may use a number of ways to control their victim, none of which are acceptable in the context of consensual, negotiated, sadomasochistic, or BDSM relationships. These actions cannot be stopped with a safe word and can include physical abuse. And this is abuse intended to harm an individual. And it's hitting, punching, choking, kicking, slapping, shoving, beating, leaving marks, or using weapons outside contract and scene limits, and not respecting safe words or real words that they're saying to stop, or real words that are saying, ouch, this hurts too much, or this hurts in a bad way. This doesn't feel right. And defending these non consensual physical actions as the way that real sadomasochism works, or this is the real BDSM. A lot of times, somebody who's new or new will encounter a predator or abuser that will claim that they want to teach them the real BDSM, and what they're going to be doing is abusing you or manipulating you. And so you definitely want to watch out. That's definitely a red flag, and we'll deal with red flags in another episode. But psychological abuse, and this is also referred to as emotional abuse or mental abuse. It's a near constant criticism, ridicule, false or misleading statements, criticizing their interest in something, humiliating or degrading them in public or private outside of the contract or the scene limits, and not respecting safe words or, like I said, real words. Like, I don't like the way I don't like the way you're using that humiliation. I don't like the way you're trying to humiliate. I don't like the way you're degrading me right now, and I want you to stop. So, such abuse is often associated with situations of power imbalance or power exchange, whether within a relationship or in the workplace. And so, abuse is, you know, you know, abuse is often someone who is a more dominant or a more submissive partner. In one side, abuse is a more dominant partner who is who is asserting dominance in a way outside of the contract or outside of the scene limits. And in a submissive side, it's often manipulating to sometimes manipulating outside of the scene or the contract to try to receive something, or try to push a scene farther than the dominant is even comfortable. So it's not always the dominant person who is the abuser. Sometimes the submissive partner is the abuser. So we definitely need to mention that. A lot of what is considered bratting these days, or being a brat, some of that can be considered abuse, because it is manipulating someone to push something beyond what they are comfortable with. And so trying to perhaps trying to manipulate someone into giving a harsher scene or a harsher level of impact than the person giving is comfortable with or agreed to. And so sexual abuse, forcing sex, specific sex acts, or sex with others, refusing to practice safer sex, refusing to negotiate or not respecting contract or scene limits, forcing sadomasochism acts during sex, or defending these non consensual physical actions as the real BDSM, or how the real, or the way that real BDSM works. So that's a phrase common within sexual abuse. And so, which is, the sexual abuse is not tolerated within the BDSM culture or community. Rape is not tolerated. Uh, any act of non-consensual consent, which is called or consensual non-consent, CNC, is a form of edge play. It has special risks involved, and special negotiations, a special contract, associated with it, a special level of agreement, and special, and safeguards put in place. And safety is a huge concern with anyone who plays in edge play. So I just mentioned those things. Economic abuse, controlling economic resources, stealing money, credit cards or checks, running up debt, forcing you to live above your means, fostering total economic dependence, using economic status to determine relationship and roles, identities, norms, including purchase of food or clothes. Financial, or what's called findom, can be a level of abuse if someone is being manipulated into giving more than what they is within the contract or the scene limits. Um, uh, a lot of abuse, or a fine line between abuse, is pro dominant services, or somebody trying to enter into a pro dominant service, or attaching an Amazon wish list, saying, telling you that I'm willing to play with you, but you have to buy something off of my Amazon wish list, would be a way a submissive would enter into economic abuse, perhaps. And so, it's manipulating, making somebody, there's a fine line between sex work and economic abuse. You definitely have to judge that for yourself, of where you draw that line. What are you comfortable with? And what is the person, being comfortable with that, so oftentimes someone may, you may take pictures of someone and they do not want you to open an OnlyFans to charge money to view these pictures that they consensually gave you. And so, there's definitely lots of economic types of abuse that can happen on either side of slashes, either a more dominant or a more submissive partner. Outing, using awareness of fear and hatred of certain marginalized groups in our society, threatening to out someone as being into S&M, being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, polyamorous, and or being an illegal immigrant, using society's prejudices as a way to control a person who is part of a marginalized group. And so you know, uh, if you get somebody to play with you and you threaten to out them to somebody else, if you blackmail them, those are issues of abuse. If you threaten to do that as part of a findom scene, you may be toying with an issue of abuse. You definitely you may want to dial it back, and bring it, or definitely negotiate those things very carefully, uh, to make sure that you are not abusing someone. Um, some people have the false idea that safe, sane, and consensual was originally formulated purely as a public relations move to make kinky erotic practices seem less threatening to the vanilla folks on the outside the scene, or, while those within the scene know better, and that's really not the case. Um, uh, SSC, or safe, sane, and consensual, was actually born in, if you know your BDSM history, it was born when the internet came around. Prior to this, local clubs, everything was more localized, and local clubs and scenes often had codes of conduct that included what was and wasn't abuse, and what was and wasn't, and how someone could become a part of the community, and what level of trust and vetting went into, and what type of orientation types of things that went into allowing someone to become a part of the community and to play in that community. And when the internet came around, people, started giving themselves their own titles, and there was less means for local accountability, because, of course, the internet is the World Wide Web, and it was more globalized then. And people who were on the outside of, or who were never involved in local scenes before, or local clubs before, or local communities, were now introduced to BDSM, or the philosophies and we're now being educated about BDSM, and we're becoming involved in BDSM. And in order to, so local creeds and local codes of conduct were no longer applicable. And so safe, sane, and consensual came about. And later, rack and prick, these are different ones, risk aware, consensual, kink. I don't know the other, and some of the other mottos were created to enable people to have some level of accountability on more of a globalized scale. And so it came about as, as a change of, as our culture changed from a more localized BDSM to a more internet based, or internet influenced BDSM, safe, sane, and consensual, became important and vital for our community. And so it was created by our community. And so um, one of the best ways to practice, especially if you're new, is to is to play with colors, and that means to that sensation. That means to communicate in the green, yellow, and red. A lot like the in the U.S. That's the stoplights are that, and so green means it's you're good to go. Yellow, you need to slow down the action. We may need to yellow, we may need to pause and or we may need to evaluate. And red, we need to stop what we're doing. And then again, red isn't always pack up and go home. Red is sometimes stop. Okay, we need to stop what we're doing. We need to figure out what we can change. We need to evaluate. We need to, but we definitely need to not just slow down. We need to we need to stop. Yellow may be ouch. That's a little too much intensity. Just a little less intensity. And red would be the wait, stop the action, and let's see what we need to change altogether. And playing with colors means that the bottom has control over the BDSM scene. It also, tops are allowed to use the colors when, okay, we're going to yellow now, or I need to yellow. I need to, something doesn't look right with this tie. I need to yellow. I need to red. I need to untie you a little bit. Something doesn't look right on with your fingers or your toes. Doesn't look like right. Oh yes, keep going, keep going. No, I need to red, and so I need to yellow, and so it's definitely tops and bottoms both have safe words, and they both have the ability to play with colors, green, yellow, and red, and so um, ultimately, the top, the more dominant, takes the responsibility and takes responsible precautions to avoid causing harm that would affect the bottom's ability to go on with life. That's ultimately why we don't want to abuse. We're not trying to cause permanent harm or severe injury. We're not trying to injure somebody. We're trying to cause pleasurable pain within BDSM. And often as well, the bottom has a responsibility to not manipulate the top and to not try to top from the bottom. That's a phrase that as we go along you'll learn. Topping from the bottom means that they're trying to direct the scene from the receiving end, and they're manipulating the scene or manipulating the person giving to, often sometimes pushing that person beyond their limits to try to receive, because they want to receive more than the person is willing to give, and that is a form of abuse. And the bottom is physically and psychologically prepared for the proposed activity, and it has disclosed to the top any relevant medical or psychological disabilities or any use of drugs or any personal limits, things that they cannot or will not do or accept. And we definitely want to definitely communicate what our limits and our boundaries are. We definitely want to do some pre-scene negotiations, even if it's just a little short talk, even if it's an informal talk. Hey, today I want to play this way. Oh, yeah, while you're playing that way, try not to do this. Oh, okay. Well, I was wanting to do that. Well, no, I'm not comfortable with that today. I'm not feeling that today. Or I would prefer to do that way, do this way and that way. but you know me, and you know what I do and don't like. It can look a lot of different ways. And so uh, note this real fast as I kind of wrap up today. Note that safe does not mean without risk. There will always be some risk involved. You know, BDSM is not totally risk free. Like I said in the opening, it can still be considered criminal. That can be a risk that you didn't necessarily go into knowing about. So you definitely want to make sure that you're playing as safe as you can, and you're playing with a safe partner, that the partner is not going to accuse you of abuse later on, or put you in a position where others are accusing you of an abuse later on. Sane means that both players know what they're doing and they have clear mental faculties. They're not angry, intoxicated. They're not in an altered mental state where they become, you want to make sure on the criminal side that you're playing with a sane person, someone who's going to, if they're going to give you consent, that they're not going to then get depressed or change their mind later on, or they have some mental instability of some kind to where they're going to forget that they gave consent, or their personality is going to change, and one personality isn't going to agree with what the other personality agreed to, and then you're facing potential criminal allegations. And consensual means both parties understand and agree to everything involved. And you know those are here's the thing: the slogan "safe, sane, and consensual" was used by the leather contingent in 1987, in the 1987 March on Washington for lesbian and gay rights. It was a concept that subsequently spread widely in both homosexual and heterosexual BDSM circles. Excuse me. I am the Primal Piggy, or I am Primal Piggy. You can find me on Facebook at the Primal Piggy, all one word. I also BDSM United is also part of a free educational BDSM website. We've been doing this since 2012. The Facebook page, and you can find and search the archives for lots of BDSM resources. We also have a group of over close to from 850 to 1,000 people that are a private group of people that are learning BDSM together, called the BDSM Education Group. You can find whips, chains, and duct tape on Facebook at WCDTBDSM, all those letters together. Thank you for listening today, and make sure that you're doing your BDSM safe, sane, and consensual.